Hello, everybody, and welcome to Libromancy, a podcast about the magic of books. I'm your host, Josh, and today I'm going to be talking about how I review things because I realized that you probably know how I review things by now, but if you don't know, then this will be just a little refresher, kind of the things that I base my feelings on books on, or the things that I try to base my feelings about books on, because sometimes a book can be either so good that it kind of transcends the ratings a little bit, or so bad that it does, technically the writing is great, but on a more realistic side, it does not work for me personally. So let's just talk about reviewing in general at first. When I review a book, most of the time, if not all the time, I'm looking for the positives of a book. I don't particularly enjoy looking for the negative things when I read a book. That just is more work to me as I'm reading, and so I don't tend to remember those things as well. I tend to look for the positive side of things. I look at the things that I really liked, and I go from there. I also use a nice tool, and this is how I log all of my books as well, along with, Goodreads and StoryPod, and not StoryPod, excuse me, StoryGraph and like Hardcover. Those are some new reviewing sites that are out there. They're very nice. I like them a lot. We could talk a little bit about those as well, benefits and differences there. So I use the Cawpile system. It was created by a YouTuber, G at Book Roast, and she's made many updates to it. I think it's on version 4 right now. It's basically just an easy way to kind of create a spreadsheet, lets you track the year the book's read, the year you read it, the way you rate your books, author, DNF reasons, series, not series, how many pages you read, how long it took you, kind of a thing. So it's got a lot of different features, and she keeps updating it and making it newer. I have not yet seen a version 5, but you never know. There might be something coming in the future. And the way the rating actually works, it's Cawpile, Cawpile. It's going to stand for characters, atmosphere, writing, plot, investment, logic, enjoyment. At least it does on my side. I've changed intrigue for investment, and logic / relationships is mostly just logic and internal consistencies. Was there? So let's go through it to begin with. I'm going to start with character, of course. That's C, and then I have a miscellaneous category that I always put. I usually use it for like these are my favorite scenes, or like these things really hit really hard when I'm writing up my review. Yeah. So first, let's start with characters. This one's kind of pretty obvious. It's just the characters. How do I think the characters feel? How do I think the characters interacted with each other? Were there any good character growth? Did I like these characters? This is where I would talk about characters maybe feeling inconsistent, or which characters I liked best, or how these characters' relationships went together and it made it better for the whole, right? So it's a pretty obvious one, characters. And this is an interesting thing, but when I try to, not an interesting thing, that's very like, oh, I'm so important, but when I read a book, I try to grade it based on itself, which is like, this is what happened, this is where it is. Could it have been better in this situation? What could have made this one better? What made this worse and potentially less good than what could have been? It's really tough to compare books to each other. It's easier when you're comparing books from the same author at about the same time in their career, but a book from an author's like his debut novel or their debut novel compared to their latest release after 10 years of writing is going to be wildly different, and it's going to be incredibly unfair. It is unfair a little bit to me to say like, well, clearly this book is just worse. And it's like, well, they had 15 years to grow to write this other book. Or, comparing other authors, it just makes it really difficult. And of course, you can compare things like that. I'm not saying you can't, but I try when I'm writing a review to really just say, to compare the book to itself, or maybe something in a similar, whether it's the same author, a debut novel with a different debut novel, those kind of things. All right, so the next one is going to be atmosphere. That is kind of the world building of the book. Does the city feel lived in? What tone do I feel when I'm reading it? If I'm reading a horror book, am I feeling scared or horror, vibes? Is it? Yeah, it's mostly, is it giving the right vibes? Does the atmosphere feel nice? Does it feel like I'm reading a sunny romp through the forest when I should be reading like a murder mystery, or vice versa? Like, what are my vibes and what am I feeling? Am I feeling the right emotions that I should be feeling as I read through the book? This one's kind of a really nebulous one for me. It's tough for me to really fill in on it most of the time. So I'll usually just give it a passing, like, good atmosphere, great atmosphere. I like this feeling. In a book I recovered recently, Finding Where You Left Him Dead, I did mention, like, yes, this book, especially at the beginning, felt like a horror, slowly transitioned into more of just a fantasy feel, but that's kind of where I started. Writing, of course, is next. W. just how was the writing? Does the writing good? Was there a lot of spelling errors? Did it feel like it flowed well? This is where I could talk about point of view if it sticks out to me. This is where I can talk about like sentence length and such. Like there's a couple of books where I've just like this annoyed me on a technical level. This is where I try and get the most technical, is the writing of the writing section. How are the chapters? Were they really short chapters? Were they really long chapters? This one, that's what it is. It's the writing, how they actually wrote the book. Now, the next one, plot for P. What is the plot? Did the plot hook me? Did I like the stakes? Was everything good? Did I feel like it was a MacGuffin? Did I feel like it was a Deus Ex Machina? Did it make sense? The story. We're going after X for Y. Oh, wait, it's actually Z. I mean, those kind of things, right? The plot, the story, the actual structure of it structure more falls into writing, I believe. But writing and plot are very close, and that's kind of why they're right next to each other. So, investment. I changed this one from intrigue. I just didn't like the way that she had kind of phrased intrigue, and so I changed it more to an investment. Like, how personally invested in this story am I? Am I really invested? Do I really like these characters? Do I really like this element of the plot? These are kind of like my favorite things of the story, basically. Or like, how driven was I to read this book? Did I pull it out every time I got a chance? Did I have to force myself to read it? Was I pulling it out when I had a few hours? Could I read it in 15-minute bites? Those kind of things. The next one, logic. That one, very simple. It's just, did things make sense? Did it make sense that they had to go from A to B? Or was it clearly just weird that like the bad guy didn't do this one thing that would have solved all of his problems? Or that the main person would have done this and solved all of his problems? I'm obviously going to give a pass. I'm not going to go too hard and be like, well, clearly if you had just done this, this, and this, everything would have been fine. But like if it's a pretty glaring thing, I am going to try and call it out and say like, this part didn't make sense to me. This wasn't logical, right? If I have this burden or this thing and I'm going to avoid it because I want to avoid it, like I'm not going to put myself in a position where I can't avoid it, right? That's kind of that logic thing. Of course, the last one, enjoyment. How much did I enjoy this book? What rating did I give it? And what rating am I going to give it for enjoyment? Were there any parts that I really enjoyed? Were there parts that I didn't enjoy as much? And then, like I said earlier, I have my miscellaneous category, which is usually just like favorite scenes, favorite moments, laugh out loud lines. They're very funny. And then this adds it all up. You rate them out of 10. I like 10 over 5 because I feel like I get a little bit more gradients there between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I can say 5 is a Midland book. Anything less than 5 is going to be pretty bad. They're not pretty. It's going to be pretty bad. 6, 7s, and 8s are pretty good. 9s and 10s are very good. Now, I do believe that you should be able to give a book 10. A 10 does not mean the book is perfect. A 10 means that it was perfect to you at that time, right? There's nothing more frustrating than reading something really good and being like, well, I can't give it a 10 because it's not perfect. There was this one mistake, or there's these little mistakes. Everything's going to have mistakes. We don't live in a perfect world, and nobody's perfect. So there's always going to be mistakes. So a 10 is still achievable, though. So I like to, so then you rate it on each one of those out of 10, divide it by 7, 8, 7. And then that gives you your final score. Most of mine sit between the 7 to the 9s range. So that's how I review books. I think it's a lot of fun. I love cataloging and reviewing my books. And while I'm on this topic, I might as well just talk a little bit about it. The main 3 things I use to kind of track my books or to be social with my books are, of course, Goodreads, and then Storygraph and hardcover. So let's talk a little bit about them. Goodreads, of course, I hope everybody knows what Goodreads is. It is one of the biggest social media platforms for books. Lets you track your currently reading, gives you updates, recommendations, has the Goodreads Choice Awards. Now, I love Goodreads. It's kind of been the go-to for a while, but I'm loving it a little bit less and less because they're not moving forward and updating it ever since it was bought by Amazon. They've changed things. They've taken away the API, so you can't pull that data as easily and not manipulate it, but do things with it. There's a lot of duplicates. A lot of people put extra books on. They read a book and they're like, oh, mine doesn't have my exact copy with this cover. I'll put it on, or a library edition. And they've integrated it with Amazon, so if a book goes on Amazon, it suddenly gets imported to Goodreads, causing a lot of duplicates and confusion. This is not great. So while I still love Goodreads and it's kind of my home list, I've moved a little bit more away from Goodreads and into Storygraph and hardcover. So Storygraph, I don't know exactly who's running it, but they've done a good job of it. You can incorporate reading challenges super easily. It's got an easy to view Goodreads to-read pile, create some recommendations. They have a little bit of a paid tier that you can use to get even more stats, but the stats that they have are great. I love their review sheet that it gives you prompts and certain things to help you review it and to see exactly what other reviewers are saying about these kind of books, and like without being spoilery, that you can say like, is this adventurous? Is this exciting? Is this romantic? Is this, X, Y, and Z? Did it feel like the characters had growth? Sometimes I wish the review had a little bit more of a change and could like have more things or less things sometimes, but it is what it is, and it's pretty great. It's good for give. The hardest part for me about Storygraph is that I have to search a little bit more to actually see what other people are reading. It's not that big of a deal. It's just a minor thing. And then a newer one that I've started looking at recently is a hardcover. It's got a really nice UI. I like it a lot. It's very easy to review and like rate and put when your books were read and things like that on it. I'm not sure. We'll see how long it lasts, if it lasts. I think it can do it. And I think it's looking like it's a good product. I like it a lot. I like to track my books. And of course, I do use the Compile 2024 system. So it helps me keep track of what I'm reading and my series that I'm reading, so I don't forget, like, oh yeah, I read 3 books of that 4-book series. The 4th one wasn't out yet. And then the 4th came out and I totally forgot about it. I can have it set up so I can see that. Helps me keep track of what genres I'm reading. And I don't keep track so that I can say I need to read more of this genre. I just find it more interesting to see what I am reading at the time and when I am reading it and what I'm reading and how it relates to things like that. So I don't use it as like a prescriptive thing. It's more of I just want to see what I'm reading and now I know. So hey, everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks to David Hilowitz for the intro and outro music. If you have any questions or comments, please send those to libromancypod@gmail.com. Of course, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. That always helps out a lot. And remember to review the magic of books.